Orange and teal is probably the single most talked about aesthetic in color grading, and there are hundreds of tutorials out there aimed at helping achieve it. So why am I jumping in with my 2 cents? Well, it's because despite all the content out there on this topic, virtually none of it covers what exactly orange and teal is, when we should or shouldn't use it, and how to quickly and cleanly achieve it inside of DaVinci Resolve. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And before we dive into how to achieve it in terms of technique within Resolve, I want to get just a couple of basic definitions and concepts in place before we begin. Okay. So number one, what is orange and teal? What do we mean when we say that? Well, orange and teal is really just a shorthand for the most common type of color harmony that we're going to find in the images that we grade. So if we think about any type of content that we might be grading, maybe it's a documentary, maybe it's a fiction film, maybe it's a TV series, maybe it's a commercial, whatever that content is, what's one thing that we are going to see over and over and over again across all these genres and different forms of content that we might be grading? People, right? People are in our images an awful lot. Maybe not every single frame, but certainly more frames than not in more projects than not, right? So people and their skin end up forming the orange component of the orange and teal aesthetic. All right, so that's the orange side of this harmony. And then if we think about the teal side is really anything in that cooler vector that happens to sit on the opposite side of the color wheel. Okay, so that might be a piece of wardrobe, that might be the sky, that might be the ocean, that might be an art-directed wall or something else that's in the frame. Literally anything else that's in that cooler vector can help to create this basic, most fundamental, most common type of color harmony. And this is, by the way, a complementary color scheme, which is the most fundamental type of color harmony in color theory. Okay, so that's what we mean when we're talking about orange and teal. And this really leads us right into a better way of understanding when we might want to or might not want to consider using an orange and teal treatment in our color grade. Here would be my recommendation. If you can detect some measure of that harmony in your incoming image before you touch anything at all, that's an image that you can probably piggyback onto and enhance that color harmony with, right, in a pretty organic way. If by contrast, you're looking at an image that really doesn't have much of that color harmony, maybe it has some skin tone, but there really are no cool components in the image, or maybe there are some cool components, but there really aren't any warm aspects of that image, or maybe it's a very washy image in terms of the way that it was photographed, you may have trouble getting an orange and teal aesthetic to feel organic to the image. And that should certainly always be our goal, at least in my opinion. I think if you think about orange and teal in the sort of negatory or derogatory context that it's sometimes referred to, usually that's someone saying something like, oh, they just used an orange and teal LUT. And what they really mean is that we as a viewer can tell that a color harmony was kind of like slapped on top of the image after the fact, as opposed to being something innate of the photographed material. Does that make sense? It's kind of like the spray tan of color grading when it's done without the proper sensitivity to the original image. So that's typically something that we want to avoid. So now that we've got some idea about what exactly orange and teal means and when we might want to try it out and when we might want to skip trying it out, let's take a look at how we can cleanly, quickly achieve it here inside of Resolve. So I'm in a new project that I've started off by doing the first couple things that I always do in a new project. I've set up my overall color management. We've got lots of videos here on the channel on that subject. If you want to see how I've done that, I explore that in detail in other videos. And I've also got my template node tree. So even though you can see labeled nodes and 5 total nodes here in the node graph, these are all empty. They're just placeholders for the work that I plan to do as I work my way through my color grade. If you want to learn more about this node graph, I also have a dedicated video on that subject. So for today, I'm going to sort of take that foundation and advance forward. And the first of the couple of techniques that I want to talk about today for achieving an orange and teal look when we are color grading is to simply balance the image. That sound crazy? Check this out. I'm going to go over here to my balance node, which I've preset for this purpose. And I'm going to go to my offset. Let me move my scope in such a way that you can see both my primaries as well as the scope. And I'm actually going to shrink my gallery down as well as my clips so that the image is a little bit bigger. Maybe let's move this up over here so that you can kind of see what I'm doing. Now check this out. I'm going to work my offset here in my primaries, And I'm going to, in this case, move my offset to the northwest because I want to get this vector mass or this signal mass that you see in the vector scope sort of straddling the bullseye. Now watch what happens when I make this simple operation. All of a sudden I've gone from very low color separation and a very subdued harmony to a pretty prominent harmony, right? Where I've got the orange side being formed by my subject's skin and the teal side being formed by her wardrobe, as well as the color of the light that's washing particularly onto the shoulder of her wardrobe, right? So this is the first easiest way of achieving more of an orange and teal aesthetic, is just to pay really close attention to your fundamentals, in this case balance, because those are going to help you to create that color separation and that color harmony, or better put, to draw that color harmony out. I'm really not creating anything as much as I am drawing out something that was already photographed. This is fast, this is clean, and this is something that if you can achieve your orange and teal aesthetic, or get part way to achieving your orange and teal vision for your image just with that operation, no one's ever going to look at your image and go, oh, they just slapped an orange and teal look on it, because this is just the image. It's just been optimized in terms of its balance to max out the color harmony that is already present in the image. Okay, does that make sense? So don't snooze on your primaries. I talk about this all the time here on the channel. Work these basics, push them as far as you can, and you'll be surprised at how much you can accomplish of your creative goals just within these first 3 nodes of the node graph. Okay, so that's number 1, is talking about sweetening your balance to get that orange and teal aesthetic happening before you even do anything fancier. Now, we're going to move on to something slightly fancier, but it's really powerful. I really like this technique. This is something that I call split toning. Okay. So what we're going to do here is, dependent on the tones in our image, let's move this these scopes out of our way here for now. And we're going to say that dependent on the tonality of our image, we are going to push either cool or warm colors into the image. So generally speaking, that's going to mean we push cooler colors, the teal side of our orange and teal, into the shadows below our middle exposure, and into the highlights above our middle exposure, we're going to push warm colors, or the orange component of our orange and teal look. And I'm going to show you the way that I like to do this in such a way that it will actually travel and work across many, many shots in a pretty consistent manner. What I'm going to do here is go over to my gallery, and I'm just going to use an instance of my exposure chart DCTL. This is a totally free download that I'm going to leave a link to in the description for today's video. And if I go over to my effects here so that I can see the parameters for this exposure chart, you can see I've already preset this to give me a single patch, total steps set to 1, of 18% middle gray in DaVinci Intermediate, which is the space that I'm working in here today. Okay. And all I'm going to do from here, I can close this for now. I'm going to hit Option S to create a new serial node. I'm going to go over here to my custom curves, and I'm just going to tap anywhere here in this gray patch that the exposure chart is generating for me. And I'm just going to tap so that I get a control point, or an anchor, down here in my custom curves. That control point, that anchor and its position, that's actually all I need this exposure chart for. As soon as I've got it, I'm going to wipe out this exposure chart. That was just a temporary thing to give me this exact position. And now I have an anchor, or a basis from which to decide, okay, how far up the tone scale do I want to push cool stuff before I start pushing warm stuff? Does that make sense? And because I'm anchored to the middle gray of my color space, that means that across many different images, especially once I optimize my exposure earlier on in my node graph, I'm going to tend to be getting warmer above my middle exposure and cooler below my middle exposure, which is a very sensible sort of anchor or pivot point for this split tone scheme that we are talking about. So let's get into it. I'm now going to ungang my little chain icon here so that I can start to preferentially push different colors into different sections of the tone scale. So down below here, I'm going to create a little rainbow with my blue channel. And in fact, before I do that, I'm going to hit these 4 arrows to pop out and get into what I call the big curves. So it's a little bit easier to draw these shapes. And I'm just going to go here and make a little rainbow, like so. And I'm not too concerned about getting this perfect right now. I just want to get it roughed in because I'm going to be able to refine it in just a moment. Next, I'm going to go to my green channel here. And I'm going to push that up and make a little rainbow, but I'm not going to go quite as far as I did with my blue. So I'm getting somewhat of a greenish blue, kind of a tealish color. All right. Now I'm going to go over here to the upper side of my curve, and I'm going to go to my red, and I'm going to very gently push this up, because you're going to see this is a very touchy curve. As soon as I start moving this control point up, I'm going to see a big reaction. So I'm going to go nice and easy with that. And then I'm going to go to my green and grab that and push it up as well. Now, at the moment, let's look at where we're at. Let's disable this by hitting Command D and then turning it back on. So this is a very rough crack at the orange and teal scheme that I wanted to create with this custom curves split toning scheme, but it's really too aggressive. And that's something that I want to emphasize to you, is not to get greedy. Go as far as you can and no further with what you're trying to do, because it's better to be a little subtler, a little less bold, but undetectable, at least in my experience as a professional. So we want to find that edge where it's starting to become obvious that we as the colorist are doing something, and back away from it so that no one can actually tell that we did anything, and it just looks like an image was photographed in a really, really beautiful way. Okay. So the way that we are going to do that, as opposed to trying to fine tune these control points, which even in this big curves pop out window can be a little tricky to do, I'm just going to work my sliders here. So I'm going to start by pulling my red back to say 75 or so. And then we're going to pull back our blue and our green as well, just sort of by eye, by taste. And I'm once again going to flip this off and on and start to see how things are feeling. That's starting to feel a little bit more what I would call kind of tucked in or subtle. It's not quite so obvious. It's not quite as bold, but it's still doing quite a bit for us. And if we close down these big curves and turn my gallery off, and hit Option D to disable everything that I've done thus far on this image, and look at where we came from. Wow, that's pretty dramatic, right? That's, by my measure, a really organic and really compelling orange and teal treatment that we've applied to this image that feels organic to the image. And because we've done it with soft measures like our custom curves and with our basic offset in our balance side here, this is something that no matter what image you apply it to, it might not look perfect on all images, but it's never going to break or create artifacts or problems or make the image look worked on, no matter what you slap it onto. Okay. So that's kind of the idea there with the split toning scheme. That's number two. That's one of my go-tos for creating color harmony, specifically an orange and teal harmony in my images. All right. And before we move on to the last thing I want to share with you, let's actually look and see how this node travels. So I'm going to right click this, label it split. And by the way, the reason that I've positioned this here in my node graph is because ideally, this is a scheme that when I get it dialed in and nuanced and finessed to exactly where I want to see it, I'm going to try to ride with it for the duration of whatever project I'm grading. So we happen to be looking at shots from different scenarios here in this project today. But if I was grading, for example, a 30-second commercial that featured this character in this environment, I would spend my time refining this scheme once and then try to use it in the same position on all of my shots with the same setting so that I've got some consistency, and frankly, so that I don't have to reinvent the wheel shot after shot after shot. Because as you can see here, we're moving fairly quickly, but this is a fairly time-consuming part of building out this look, okay? So I've got my split node labeled here. I'm going to tap it and hit Command C. And let's just go to my next shot and try placing it in a similar position at the end of the node graph and see how it feels. So before I do that, just look at this image. That sort of innate color harmony that we talked about at the beginning of our conversation today, that's here, isn't it? I've got cooler accents in the wall behind my subject, and then I've got these warm accents in my subject's skin and in these lamps and in the furniture. So this is a prime candidate for doubling down on that natural color harmony that's in there and really emboldening it. So I'm going to go to node number 7 and hit Command V to paste that split toning scheme. And as I flip this off and on, you can see what I'm getting here. And that's looking really good. And that's with even kind of skipping past the balancing operation that I encourage you to always start your process with. And even above and beyond that, to work your exposure and your ratio, which I talk about lots in other videos here on the channel. So this is sort of a good opportunity just to reemphasize what you do here plays a huge role in the final character of your grades. So don't move too quickly past these and spend your time optimizing these things even underneath more nuanced or complex operations you might be doing afterwards, such as this split toning scheme. So we can see this travels really well here. Let's go to node number or shot number 3 rather. Place this node in the same position. Same thing there. That's giving me that same orange and teal color harmony, or again, to put it more accurately, it is piggybacking off of the orange and teal harmony that's already somewhat present in this frame. And I'm simply enhancing and elevating and nuancing that separation between my cooler, my more cyan, my more teal colors, and my warmer, my more orange, my more yellow, my more gold colors, okay? So it works really well here. Now, before we look at my last sort of go-to technique that I like to use when creating split toning, let's look here at shot number 5. And I'm going to place this same split toning node at the same position at the end here. So I just want to point out, this is a shot that doesn't have as much of that innate color harmony as we've looked at in these prior 4 shots, okay? And for that reason, I'm still safe, I think, here. I've been subtle and soft enough in what I'm doing that no one would be mad at this adjustment here. However, this doesn't feel, first of all, as successful as the other instances of this same node. And it is bordering on something that feels a little bit imposed, because all I'm really doing is biasing neutrals or near neutrals, like the sheets and the headboard here, that any viewer is going to look at and know either consciously or subconsciously, those things should be fairly neutral in color. At least that's what they were when this was photographed. So the further you push away from that, the more worked on your image is going to look. So I just want to emphasize that whenever you are using a orange and teal sort of approach to your image, you need to be sensitive to the source image and make sure that it can accommodate that treatment in what I would call a sort of credible way, at least if you're trying to work invisibly and in a way that feels like you're working off of the original image, which is my preference as a professional colorist. Okay, so just quick note there before we move on to shot number 6, where we are going to look at a final technique that I really like to use for enhancing an orange and teal aesthetic that's present in the image. So you can see this image totally already has it, right? We got cool stuff back here. We've got skin tone out front. We've got some cooler wardrobe. It's already there. But something else that we can do to enhance that is we can play around with hue rotation. So in this case, I'm going to go down here into node number 4, into my sort of secondaries branch of my node graph. And I'm going to look at my hue versus hue curves. And what I want to do in this situation is start by looking at my blues. I'm going to use my control surface here, but you could also just draw here on the curves graph. And I'm going to look at rotating my blues. Let's actually pop my scopes out so that you can see what's happening there as well. I'm going to try to make sure that everything you need to see is visible to you, because it's not always that easy to find a good position for all these things. So something like that. I'm now going to take those blues and start to rotate them kind of more toward a cyan, okay? Now, if I turn this off and on, you can see those cyans are starting to pop just a little bit more down there in the background behind my subject. And if we now pair this with another hue versus hue adjustment, if we take our yellows and start to move those more toward kind of an orange or even a red, like so, and if we turn that off and on, you can see we're really starting to get even more separation. You can even see it in the vector scope here. I'm literally compressing or aligning the dominant hue vectors of this image onto more of an orange and teal vector, as opposed to a slightly more yellow and blue vector where it happened to come in innately. Does that make sense? That's another thing you can play with. You can do one or both sides of this adjustment that I just tried on. You can do this underneath a split toning scheme like we just looked at. You certainly can and should do this in concert with sweetening your exposure and with sweetening your overall color balance, like so, but especially in concert with those elements. Let's even add that split toning piece that we were working with. Especially in concert with all those other elements, this piece can really help you inch your way even further into that sort of like orange and teal palette, if that's what you're trying to create. And again, because we're doing it broadly, softly, using curves and really skipping some of the qualifiers and sharper measures that you often hear people talk about when we're talking about an orange and teal treatment, we're able to do this faster, and we're able to do this in a way that we can feel confident isn't going to create weird artifacts or breakage in our image. So I hope you enjoy not only looking at these hands-on techniques for achieving orange and teal, but also thinking and talking about what exactly orange and teal is, when we might want to use it, and when we might want to skip past using it. This is one of my favorite things to think about. And again, I think that it's something that tends to either be demonized or sort of worshipped in image mastering circles or among filmmakers, where we'll say, oh, well, if you really want that Hollywood blockbuster look, you have to have an orange and teal harmony. Of course, that's not true. And you also will hear people say, oh, that's just an orange and teal look. That's just an orange and teal LUT. That's not a really artful grade. Of course, that's not true either. Orange and teal is not something that we should always avoid or always use. The truth is more nuanced than that. And so we as artists need to arm ourselves with the tools as well as the concepts and the knowledge to know when and how to use the orange and teal technique in an effective way. And if you want to go even further on this subject, we're going to be talking about it in even more depth in grade school, my Friday live sessions that we'll be doing following the release of this video. And something else that we're going to be talking about in grade school is the way that I, as a professional, most commonly will introduce the type of orange and teal color harmony that we talked about today. Spoiler alert, I don't actually do it in this way most of the time. Why? Because this takes a while. And usually once you've found a cocktail, a combination that works, I often want to reuse it again and again and again, project after project after project. Or in my case, I have a variety of different presets for this that work really well that I've actually cooked down into LUTs and that I offer on my website. That's one of the main things that I look for in a overall creative look when I'm deploying it is some color harmony, whether that's orange and teal or something else, that is going to automatically make these nuanced adjustments for me, and that I've already put lots and lots and lots of hours into developing and perfecting so that I don't have to spin it up from zero on every project that I tackle. So if you want to go even further with this, hope to see you in grade school where we're going to chop up this subject even further. And in the meanwhile, I hope you take these ideas and these techniques, give them a try, and let me know what you think.